In this video, I'm going to explain how to scale e-com brands profitably, sustainably, and most importantly, quickly. I'm going to lay out a mathematical equation and showing you in a very simple way what's the 4 crucial variables, what you have to focus on that really matter. There's a lot of noise out there and people overcomplicate things, but normally it's about going back to the basics, especially if you're having trouble scaling, if you feel like you reach a class ceiling, maybe you can't get past 100K a month, is usually something like this. Because if your fundamental numbers don't work, no shiny object's going to help you. It's about going back to the basics. Quick background about me. My name is Lucas. I'm the founder of TNS. And for the past 9 years, me and my team, we have scaled over 450 brands, have tracked hundreds of millions in revenue, and have advised 7, 8, 9, even 10-figure e-com brands, and in the process managing multiple 9-figure portfolio revenue. So I know a thing or two about e-com, and here's what you need to understand. You need to understand e-com is competition, of course, and your profit is how competitive are you in the marketplace. And competition is a very abstract word. People always say, oh, e-com is so competitive, but what does it mean in practice? What does competition really mean in e-com? So to understand this, let's just imagine there's your company, company A, and competitor B. There's nobody else. You two share the whole market 50-50. Basically, normally, of course, there's thousands of competitors, right? Everyone taking like a piece of the pie, a bunch of medium-sized players, then a big player like Amazon taking a huge share. But to make it easy to understand, let's just assume it's just you and your competitor. The only way for you to get market share from your competitor is to take it away from him, basically. So competition in e-com means competition for market share, of course. And now, how do you get market share in e-com? Mainly through paid ads. Especially at scale, it's basically only paid ads. So competition in e-com is basically paid advertising competition. So competing for advertising slots that your competitor currently has. Once again, as a background, how do all the advertising networks operate? Doesn't really matter if it's Meta, so Facebook, Instagram ads, if it's Google, if it's YouTube, if it's Twitter, if it's even Taboola, anybody really, just put your favorite network in here. They all operate on the same auction system. So basically your company, once again, and your competitor, you both run an ad and you're both competing for the same advertising slot. In this example, there's one advertising slot and only one of you can get it. There's an auction system and you have to get this advertising slot. In any network, there's a limited amount of advertising slots. So for example, on Google, you Google something, there's a limited amount of sponsored slots at the top. On Facebook, Instagram, every 4th or 5th Instagram story is an advertising slot. On YouTube, the same. There's one in the beginning, one in the middle, one at the end, for example. So it really depends on the advertising network, but there's always a limited amount of advertising slots, and they can't have infinite slots. Otherwise, the user experience is going to be very, very bad. So there's a limited amount of advertising slots, and you're competing with other companies to get this advertising slot. So to take market share away from somebody, you have to take the advertising slot away from your competitor B. That's the only way to get it. And how do the platforms determine who gets the advertising slot? Of course, they always say, oh, it's about the customer experience and how good the ad is. Of course, it's important, but it's mostly about how much you're paying. Those are public companies that need to make advertising money, so that's the main thing. How much you bid for the advertising slot is determines your ad cost, but also who gets the advertising slot. On Instagram, Facebook, it's more important, for example, how visually appealing your ad is, if it fits the user experience, if it fits the vibe of the platform. On TikTok, the same. But on Google, where it's more text-based, it doesn't matter as much. Other aspects, like, for example, page speed, matter more because Google wants people to land on the ad, on the website very fast. In this example, I Googled buy diapers online to drive this point home. And here you can see I got 2 sponsored slots. And then the organic results begin, which are very hard to get in, especially for those like popular keywords. But normally you get 2 to 4 advertising slots. Here I only get 2. So that means if your diaper startup wants to be in here, you need to get one of those people out. You need to get either Pampers out or Honest. And both of them are massive companies spending millions. They basically have infinite money. So that kind of drives my point home. To get market share from those companies in advertising, you have to take this advertising slot away from them. That means you have to spend more than them to get this advertising slot. So the question is, how much can you afford to spend on acquiring a new customer? That's the main question in advertising. That's the main question, how you can get more market share from your competitors. That brings me to my first point. The company that can afford to spend the most on acquiring a new customer will always win in the long run. Why is this so important? Let's look at an example again. Company A, company B, selling the same product for the same price point. So 100 euros, same product. In this case, to make it easy to calculate, only difference is company A spends 20 bucks to produce the good and company B spends 30 bucks for whatever reason, but same product, they have to spend more. That means company A has a gross margin of 80%, and company B has a gross margin of 70%. Now let's look at the impact on competitiveness. For this, we have to calculate the break-even ROAS. So basically, if we spend €1 on advertising, how much do we have to make back to break even? For this, we have to calculate 1 divided by the gross margin. So 1 divided by 80% makes a break-even ROAS of 1.25. And for company B, it's 1 divided by 70% with a break-even ROAS of 1.42. So basically, for every euro we spend on advertising, company A has to make €1.25 back just to break even, and company B has to make €1.42 back just to break even. Now you might think, okay, 17 cents, not that big of a difference, but already company A can spend 17 cents for every euro more on advertising than company B. Small difference, but still small, right? Now let's just imagine company B is even worse off. So for some reason, they have to spend 50 bucks just to produce the same good. Now we would have a break-even ROAS of 2. So that means for every euro we spend on advertising, we have to make €2 back just to break even, just to cover our cost of goods. And now the difference is very stark, right? So company A now has a 75-cent advantage for every euro, right? So this company can spend massively more on advertising than company B can. And it doesn't matter at what point in time this happens, but for sure company A can scale their ads higher. Maybe the point comes at 10K ad spend a month, maybe only at 100K, but the point will come and people overlook this. And I know, oh, breaking news, better margin means better competitiveness, but those small differences really matter, especially in the long run. They have a huge impact, and especially if you're maybe struggling and reaching a class ceiling. If this is an issue you have, you're in really big trouble, because if you're already struggling at the margin level, that means you didn't even have any real issues, like any ad account bans, inventory issues, like advertising stuff, right? This is the very basic stuff. You're already struggling at the very base level. How do you want to compete in the big leagues, basically, right? So the key takeaway is the better the margins, the more competitive are you, for sure. And as I said, a company can afford to spend the most in acquiring a new customer will always win. And usually, in most cases, that's the company with the best margin. Okay, so margin is the first factor, basically, how much a company can spend to acquire new customers. But there's another critical variable, and it's called FPV. So basically, it's the first purchase AOV. So how much money are we getting from the customer on the first purchase? We call this FPV. That's basically the income side of things. And then secondly, CAC. So the customer acquisition cost, basically the expense side of things. Acquisition cost, whatever. CAC. Right? FPV and CAC. And basically, the bigger the difference between FPV and first purchase AOV, the more competitive the brand becomes, and the easier it is, once again, to capture market share. So in this visual here, this is the customer acquisition costs, how much we're spending to get a new customer, and FPV, how much are we getting from this new customer. And this is basically the determined how scalable a brand is, because the difference between those two numbers, we can invest in advertising, which is amazing, of course. So basically, the part in between here, we can invest in advertising. Once again, this company here can spend more on ads than this company, and once again can gain more market share. So there's two ways, of course, to increase this distance. So first of all, you can decrease the customer acquisition cost. That's basically by running better ads, testing more. Your brand also becomes stronger. So maybe you have to spend less on marketing touch points. and get the customer acquisition cost down, but it's always a limit, especially when you scale. This cost is always actually like gonna rise, right? So there's always a limit that you can do on the expense side of things, but on the FPV, on the income side of things, you can always do more. You can always like kind of squeeze a little bit more out of this, basically. Like in everything in business, normally the income side you can scale more than the expense side of things. You can always cut costs, but only to a certain point, and especially if you are scaling, this difference is gonna shrink a bit. So what's ways that you can increase FPV? So you can do upsells, of course, bundles, you can do special offers like seasonal offerings, you can have better positioning, and there's two ways that you can increase FPV, basically. So you can have FPV increases that also increase your cost of goods, So basically, if you do cross sales, upsells, and stuff where you sell a different product, of course, you also have to fulfill that product and you have extra cost attached to that. So your margin is not going to get better, only the FPV. But there's also the possibility to have FPV increases that don't increase your cost of goods, right? So, for example, just raising your prices. So in this example from earlier, if you think, okay, I have a disadvantage at this level, I'll just sell the product for more money. Of course, there's other issues with this, but if you just increase the price, your cost of goods doesn't rise, right? So basically, just increase your margin and your FPV at the same time. Of course, there's other issues with this, but other companies we know, especially in the health industry, have had good experiences with upselling, for example, digital products or communities or like an app, for example, where there's no real marginal cost of fulfillment, right? So in this case, once again, you increase your FPV and you also additionally increase your margin. So it's different ways, but basically you should always think about, okay, how do I increase this distance? How do I get my CAC down? How do I get my FPV up, basically? And now the key question is, how cheaply can we acquire customers and how much can we get from them, like from the first purchase? And the larger the difference here is, the more competitive we basically are, and the margin is the underlying factor here, because as I said earlier, like when you scale advertising, this distance is naturally gonna go down. That's totally normal, and that's also the reason why you only have the margin issues maybe too late, because in the beginning it doesn't matter. You can get your CAC down, get your FPV up, but at some point this distance is going to shrink, and now suddenly the 17 cents in margin difference really start to matter. And that's also, as I said, maybe one of the reasons why you can't scale further, because you disregarded this in the beginning, because the basics only come out at scale, basically, right? At scale, it's basically the simple things once again. Why does this matter? If you have a larger difference in competitor, you can choose to invest a portion of this difference just to keep the competitors at arm's length, just to try new things maybe, and just to gain market share. Once again, to gain market share, you have to take it away. You have to get more advertising slots so you can invest, or you have to invest your advantage here in advertising to get more from your competitor that cannot do this. Because if they do this, they are going to go bankrupt very, very fast. And there's actually like a good example of this from the past that Amazon did against diapers.com. So diapers.com, I think in 2009 or something, was selling diapers, of course, and Amazon was just starting to get into diaper selling. And basically Amazon undercut them by 30% just to win customers, and basically lost 200 million on purpose just to drive diapers.com out of business. So basically, they lost 200 million on purpose, and then 1 year later, I think they bought diapers.com, and you never heard from them again. So first undercutting them, losing money in the process, and then buying the company. So there's actually like an example from the eCom OG Amazon doing this as just said, investing like a strategic portion of their competitive advantages to keep a new competitor away. And now the last factor, basically customer lifetime value. So how much is one customer spending with you over the lifetime of him being customer with you? In short, CLV. That's the formula for long-term success, the credit difference between margin, FPV, CAC, and CLV, the more competitive are you, and the more aggressively you can scale, and the more you can spend on ads, the more market share you can take away from your competitors, right? So if you optimize those 4 factors, you won't just survive, you will scale profitably, rapidly, and sustainably. So what's the next steps now for you? First, I would start with analyzing your margin, right? As I said, the base level, see, can you, first of all, calculate your real margin and look for ways to optimize. Like, can you improve supply chain stuff, maybe switch suppliers, logistics, internal processes, maybe switch like your business location, something like this. How can you get your margin up? That's the very base level. And in future videos, we'll also break down exactly how to calculate and optimize this step by step. Then step 2, I would go about increasing my first purchase value. As I said, CAC is always nice to get down, of course, and you should do it at the same time, but there's always limits here. So FPV, you can always do a bit more upsells, bundles, exclusive offers. Even like a small increase in FPV can have a really, really big impact. And I myself know brands where like they can just spend 15 euros more on customer acquisition, and they make 10 times more than the competitors, basically, where the others are struggling to scale, right? So really focus on FPV with different things. As I said, try looking at FPV increases that also increase your cost of goods, and some that don't increase your cost of goods. You can always combine all of them, of course, and also look at what's possible for you, right? So like maybe in our first example here, if you cannot increase your margin, you have to look for different ways, right? So, but for example, if your competitor is better at margins and better at like upsells and gets this up, then it's tough for you. So if you're struggling here, if you're at a disadvantage here, you have to be better here than your competitor, right? So maybe have a more aggressive upsell chain to kind of compensate for this fall, and later in the future, once you fix this, then go back to the drawing board and switch suppliers and maybe get your margin up, right? So you have to see where are you at a disadvantage at, and where are you at an advantage at with your competitors, basically. And then at the very last, I would go about optimizing the LTV. So like better retention, once again, email flows, SMS stuff, right? Like all the backend stuff, maybe your own app, push notifications, right? A subscription offering. There's a lot of ways here to do this. And of course, always optimize all of them at the same time. But if you haven't done anything, this is the order I would progress at, basically. And this was more a theoretical introduction to those variables. In the future, we're going to have some more practical strategies and dive into each of those, how to optimize them. So more practical, basically. But I hope you found some value in this video. If you did, leave it down in the comments below. Also, maybe other things you want to learn something about. We're going to post some more videos in the future. So if you don't want to miss anything, please subscribe, hit the notification bell, and thank you for watching.